and thank you so much for joining me for Saturday Night Crafting. My name is Sasha Reed and I tend to do technique tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and tonight I've got a fun one where we're going to take the traditional Joseph's coat technique, but we're going to alter it slightly. So on the screen I am taking you through the basic Joseph's coat technique. It's where you apply ink to your card panel, roughly ink blending it, getting a whole bunch of colors down, whatever colors you kind of feel like you want to do. And then we're going to stamp over top of that panel with either one solid stamp, or you could use multiple stamps if that's what you've got. You stamp it down with some sticky heat embossing ink and apply some clear embossing powder. Now it has to be clear because that's what's going to show through in this technique. And again, this is the basic version of Joseph's coat, and we're going to change it up in just a second, and I'm going to share with you a new way of doing it. With the basic version, you've got your color down on your cardstock, you put your embossing ink over the top, and then you apply your black ink to cover up all the color apart from the area in which you heat embossed. Now this time, for this technique, we are going to do it slightly different, and I'm going to use individual stamps so that I can kind of layer those stamps, and I'm going to use multiple colors, but I'm going to do them in layered form instead of on a card panel kind of ink blending. We are going to do layers of it. Now I've got this silicone mat from scrapbook.com. I love using this when I'm doing any kind of ink blending because it holds my ink pad in place and holds my cardstock down a bit for me, so it just kind of makes my surface a bit more tacky, which is really nice and handy. I will do my best to link everything down in the description box for you if you want to check out any of the products I've used. If I forget anything, please do just ping me a comment because I am very, very forgetful at times. So our first step is to take our first stamp and put that layer down. Now if you can stamp twice and emboss twice in the exact same place, then I find that's really helpful because it kind of helps to build up that embossing layer. But if you can't, once will do. As you'll see in my video, I am doing most of these with just once, stamping once, because I am using individual stamps, so to put them on a stamp platform would be a kind of a pain. So I'm going to take my inks and I'm going to go from lightest to darkest. So I'm starting out with all blues and I'm going to kind of build up my layers. So that first layer I did in white and I heat embossed it, so that first layer is shining through as white. Then I added down my first ink, which is the light blue ink, and now I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that panel is dry. In between every single one of these steps, make sure your panel is completely dry. So you can do a little test and check if it's dry by shaking some embossing powder on there, which is what I just did, and if it tips off nice and easy, then you know for sure that that panel is dry. So to ensure my cardstock was dry, I used my heat tool to dry it, and then I used my anti-static powder bag, and then I double checked that it was all dry with my embossing powder being tipped on it. So here comes the second layer. I've gone ahead and made sure to overlap my stamps a little bit. I find it looks much better when you overlap. You'll see one without overlapping as well as ones with overlapping. I've gone ahead and stamped that next layer, and then I'm going to take a dry tissue, or you can take a dry cloth, and just kind of remove the excess ink from on top of the embossing powder. Again, repeat the steps, make sure it's fully dry before you move on to stamping with your third stamp. Again, I'm going to slightly overlap in places. Sometimes it's quite nice if you've got solid stamps. You could use solid stamps and kind of layer them alongside each other. All I had were the sort of outline stamps, so that's what I'm working with today. And again, I'm doing Christmas in August because I missed Christmas in July, so these are Christmas themed cards, but you could do birthdays or anniversaries, whatever you fancy. So now I'm going to come in with my third layer. I do find that if you do more than 2 to 3 layers, it gets really difficult for that ink to absorb into the cardstock. This one I'm doing 4 layers. I would say 3 as a max is probably best, but you can see all those colors there. I've got the white, the light blue, the slightly darker blue, and now I've got this darkest blue. Obviously the last layer is going to be black. Now I did start my black layer with my sponge dauber, but I felt like it was really, really light, and actually you don't need to worry because at this point this is the last layer, so I just took my ink pad and went direct to paper and really saturated that cardstock. Because it's got so much ink already in it, it's hard to kind of get it to absorb, but the black really makes all those colors pop. So this is where we get that multi-layered Joseph's coat going on. So we are adding in layers of color rather than on one flat panel having sort of ink blending. We are adding the color on top of each other. So you do have to be mindful and aware. The colors you pick need to kind of go well with each other, or you will end up with like a mucky brown color. Or you could always go with the same color family and just do different shades like I did with the blue. This one here, we are going to change it up and use quite striking colors against each other, and you'll see they won't obviously stay the right colors apart from the first one where I'm going to use the yellow color. That will stay yellow, but everything else kind of slightly changes because of the color underneath it. So bear that in mind when you're picking your colors and what you want to do for this technique. So I'm starting out with my first layer, which is going to be the flowers. Again, I did 5 colors with this, and I would recommend doing 3 to 4 maximum. So I felt like this one was really hard to get the ink to absorb. I really wanted to push it to the max and see how many colors we could get down on one piece of cardstock. So I guess actually this one's got 6 layers of color because the first is always white. So I've done my white, then I've done my yellow. I'm doing the exact same thing in between. I'm drying my cardstock before I go and add my next embossing powder. Then this is where I bring in worn lipstick, which is like a pinkish red, and obviously it's turning orange because I'm combining that pink with the yellow. So that's what I mean by bear in mind your colors that you're using. Again, drying in between, doing the next layer, and that's where I'm going to bring in the blue, and it kind of turns it to a slight tealy greeny color. Again, if you remember, I'm working with lightest colors to the darkest colors as well, so that I can always make sure I cover up underneath. If you're finding the ink isn't saturating into the cardstock very much, you can always go direct to paper. So that's what I did there. I added in that next color, and I kind of should have stopped here because it was getting really difficult to get the color to absorb in, but I wanted to keep pushing it, so I did a purple as well. And obviously the next layer is going to be black on top of the purple, and I'm going to add in a few more images in between all my spaces. And this one is less layered over top. This is more sort of layered around each other. It was hard to see that purple layer, but when I've zoomed in and it's all dry, you can now see that there is that purple there. Right, moving on to another one, we're going to use the stamp set again with the stars, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We'll start out with our first layer being white, and then we'll come in with a slightly darker blue. This time I decided to go for less colors, more bold colors. So I've got that blue as the first one. My second layer is going to be the dark purple. And then my last layer again is the black. I felt like this was a lot more effective. This was less colors. So in total I've got the 4 colors going on, but it was less layering. And so I felt like that black really absorbed in a lot more. And I love how it looks. You've got that multi-layered effect going on, and then you've got the Joseph's coat kind of blacking out the background. Now you could of course always just use a darker shade or the darkest shade of the color you're working with, which is what I do with the next card here. I've got this blue one, and instead of using black, I use the darkest blue, the Uncharted Marina, I believe it's called. So you don't have to use a black as the final color. You can just use a dark coating to kind of cover it all. Here's another one where I did less colors, but I didn't actually overlap them, and I don't like that one so much. Not as much of a fan of this one either, but I love how the blue ones turned out. Let me know what you think is your favorite one, because I couldn't really make up my mind, but I definitely felt like the blue ones that I did, or this one here with the bit of purple, I really like those ones a lot more. Now we're going to throw together a couple cards, and I've still got the rest of the bases left over to make other cards with, but I thought I'd share with you a couple ideas of what you could do. So I'm going to cut myself a little panel to go kind of in the middle of my card base, and I'm cutting myself some layers. At this point I decided that I love that holographic card, but I also wanted a layer of color to kind of tie that purple in, because the holographic card is great for highlighting all the colors, but I felt like my little purple stars were kind of getting lost, so I decided to cut myself a little panel just slightly larger than the holographic card, only just so slightly, and then I've got my layers that I can then go ahead and put on top. Obviously you could die cut something out of that holographic card if you wanted to save some of it and not waste so much, but I've got an absolute ton of it, so I wasn't too worried. So I've gone ahead and layered this up. I'm going to pop this onto my card base. It does look like I'm using an excessive amount of glue. Don't stress. My glue bottle was running out, and it was really small and fine coming out that tube. So I kind of had to really squish it out and get it onto that card base. To finish off the front of my card, I die cut out Happy Holidays. I took my ink pad and created that purple color again on some cardstock and die cut it out, and then added some little gems that I had floating around on my desk to kind of finish that off. And then for my next card, I popped it up on an angle on some foam tape, and then grabbed a little sentiment stamp from one of my sets, popped that on with a few gems as well. So really fun technique to create kind of dramatic backgrounds and a different way to use the Joseph's Coats technique. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another fun tutorial. Make sure you click subscribe and like and comment on the video. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Have a great week.